Inside TechNet, we have everything in the tech ecosystem. We have semiconductors to search engines. We have venture capital. We have clean energy. We have the apps and online platforms that you think of that are huge, like Airbnb, Uber, and Lyft. We also have Google, Apple, Facebook, Cisco, Oracle, some of the biggest and most mature companies on the planet, and some that you'll hear about today too, CA Technologies and AT&T. So at TechNet, we represent all of the tech ecosystem, which makes it really wonderful and fun and special for us, and our executives are very engaged in what we do. So 4 years ago, TechNet partnered with the Progressive Policy Institute to study the app economy. And back during that time, we found that 466,000 jobs have been created. Now we partner with PPI again, and we're here to unveil the study and the results of the study today. And the results are astounding. It's almost quadrupled. And more important, it's branched out from just in Silicon Valley to all across the country. So we want to talk about that today, and Dr. Michael Mandel, who did the study and can go over the results with us, will be the first presenter. We're also going to talk with the rest of the panelists who will share their interaction, their involvement with the app economy, and their perspective on it. And we will also touch on what the federal government can do and not do to either support or to choke this emerging part of the economy. So with that, I want to go ahead and let Dr. Mandel talk a little bit first about his study findings, and then we'll go ahead and involve the rest of the panel. Dr. Mandel?
Thank you, Linda. I'm actually going to stand up here. I've got a smartphone. I'm sure that the rest of you have smartphones too. I counted this morning. There's 25 apps on this phone that I use at least once a week. If I counted ones that I use on a monthly basis, it would go up to closer to 50. Each of these apps, depending on who is producing it, has many, many people behind it. People who wrote them, people who maintain it, people who help support the users. A lot of, I have banking apps, and a lot of these banking apps I'm sure are under attack from potential hackers all the time. They have to be defended. I have apps from large companies. I have apps from small companies. I have apps that were done in Silicon Valley. I have apps that were done in New York, in Washington, D.C., and all across the country. Now, what I don't have is I don't have very many gaming apps. I'm a very serious guy. So for those of you who have game apps, you probably have a lot more than I do. And like Linda said, we worked with TechNet back in 2012 to do the very, very first estimate of the employment impact of the app economy on the U.S. And the number at that point was 466,000. It got a tremendous amount of press at that point because, wow, that seemed like an awful lot of jobs for a technology that was only 4 years old. And I went off and I did other things and around technology and data, the data-driven economy and regulation, innovation. And I came back in 2013. I came back and it was actually a little bit later than that, and I did another study, and I got 750,000. I said, wow, this is a lot bigger, using basically the same methodology. And I went away for a while, and I said, I'm just not going to look at it again because I'm sure the number is not going to be that much bigger, and who wants to be disappointed anyhow? And I came back and I did it again, basically the same methodology. And much to my surprise, the growth rate had stayed about the same, about 37% per year, which is far faster than any other part of the U.S. economy in terms of employment. And so the number that I got for this study, 1.66 million jobs in the U.S. are part of the app economy, either in terms of building apps, maintaining apps, supporting apps, and with a conservative estimate of spillover effects. When I mean conservative is like far lower than anybody else ever uses for spillovers. So this is pretty amazing. This is an exceptionally dynamic part of the economy, And it's not simply, as Linda mentioned, it's not simply in Silicon Valley, it's all across the country. You'll sort of find in the briefing packet that was out there, there's a list of the top 25 states, and measured in two ways. One is by the number of app economy jobs. So California is still number one, but it's been shrinking as a share. New York, Texas, we're talking about places like Dallas and Austin. Illinois, we're talking about Chicago, which has really done phenomenally well. Virginia, we're talking about a combination at that point of the private sector and also government related, because of course apps are produced not just by private companies but also by the government in terms related to interfacing with citizens and also internally. And so what we see is a spreading around the country of these jobs. And what's wonderful about them is they don't require a lot of investment in heavy physical capital. What they require is investment in human capital. They are jobs that create spillover jobs in the local area. They are exceptionally potent in terms of focusing new tech hubs, because almost every company at this point, and it doesn't matter what they are, needs an app either for external use or for internal use. So you'll see an enormous amount of companies producing apps for their workers. If you think about, if you've ever gone onto an airplane and you see the crew looking at their iPads, those are apps that they're looking at. Some of those apps are produced by the airplane manufacturers, some of them are produced by the airplane, the airline. And so this is a fast-growing sector. It's a sector that's export-oriented. It's a sector that produces a tremendous amount of jobs. And the most surprising thing, at least to me, is that it's continued to grow at the same very fast rate. So I think I'll stop right here because we have a wonderful panel. Feel free to ask questions along the way. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Mandel. We appreciate it. We're going to cue right now a video that was recently shown on CBS that I think will give you a good sense of the broadening out of the app economy across the country.
It is not sports, but tech companies bringing thousands of people to the Midwest. Mark Strassman reports from Lincoln, Nebraska on America's new innovation frontier.
Across the Great Plains, even in winter, the new cash crop is high-tech.
It's time we bang the drum and let people know there's something happening over here in Lincoln, Nebraska.
What's happening, say Stephanie and Paul Jarrett, is an explosion of startup software companies in the heartland. In 2012, they decided to launch BuloBox, a monthly service providing samplers of premium health products. But first, they had to leave San Francisco.
We could just be another startup on the West Coast in the Valley, or we could be part of this movement in the Midwest.
BuloBox now has 100,000 subscribers and did $5 million in sales last year, helped greatly by this community.
It felt like people in Nebraska, investors or just other connections, would bend over backwards to help you.
This is Silicon Prairie, and it's remaking cities across the Midwest, from Des Moines to Kansas City to Lincoln, where David Graff co-founded Huddle in 2006.
Our pitch is get in here and make a difference right from the start.
Look at this with me. What's our tackle doing?
Huddle services sports teams, amateur and professional. Coaches post their game film to Huddle's site, and the company's software instantly analyzes it.
What is it about Lincoln that works? University system is phenomenal. It's a very supportive community for your entrepreneurs.
Paul Jarrett compared Silicon Prairie to Silicon Valley like this.
We have a core value, and one of our core values is fire the apples.
You realize that people from New York and San Francisco watch us. You know what I mean?
Another competitive edge. Everything's cheaper. The median home in San Francisco sells for $1.1 million. In Lincoln, It's about $158,000.
You can grow your team a lot faster with the lawless capital. Same with our office space.
Today, Lincoln is becoming a mini Palo Alto. It's home to more than 100 software startups, and once abandoned buildings now house co-working spaces and incubators.
You just hear from people that come visit and check out the town, like, they go, Lincoln is cool. Like, this is really cool. And they're like, it is, right?
There are challenges. Companies have struggled to attract outside talent and investors. 75% of investments last year went to 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts. But that's changing.
I don't think that reflects the distribution of great entrepreneurs with great ideas.
Steve Case, a co-founder of AOL, heads up Revolution, a venture capital firm. It plans to invest close to $1 billion in tech companies inside the coasts.
Some people call it the flyover country, which is kind of pejorative. We think they're great entrepreneurs building great businesses.
Huddle started with 3 employees. It now has 400.
On Silicon Prairie, you're the Microsoft in Lincoln. It's been an amazing ride. We're incredibly lucky. We've got a great team around us, and I think that's what the most fun part of it is.
Huddle has employees working in 14 countries, but its new world headquarters is going up right here, where it all began. For CBS This Morning, Mark Strassman, Lincoln, Nebraska.
Lincoln sounds cool.
It's a great American story. The urge to create and innovate.
And then you do it. I love it. Go Huddle.
So with that, I want to bring in the rest of our panelists, and I'll introduce all of the panelists, and then I'll have a few questions for them. And then we also want to engage you, the audience, in a discussion with them as well. First, I'll start with a company that was referenced in that video. Ron Klain is with Revolution. I know Ron from, 1988. Yeah. And we served together in the Clinton administration, and Ron also served in the Senate. I think you're the only other person besides me on this panel that served on a Hill. And he also has been recently the White House Ebola Response Coordinator and was Chief of Staff to Vice President Biden and Senior Aide to President Obama. And I believe you also have been helping a certain candidate prep for debates. It's for political junkies here in the room. Ron is also the preeminent debate prepper for the Democratic presidential candidates. Next we have Terry Howerton, who comes to us today from Chicago, and he's the founder and chairman of TechNet, and it's a venture development firm that's building new collaborative models for leading corporations to engage and extract value from the global entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I also want to recognize Brendan Peter, who is Vice President of Global Government Relations at CA Technologies. He leads the Washington office and directs CA's global public policy agenda. And Brendan has 20 years experience in cybersecurity, healthcare, and technology policy issues. I also want to recognize Carl Ratanis. Carl is a former teacher and administrator who co-founded Learn. He's going to tell us a little bit about that. He also is the CEO of the 2015 North Carolina Technology Company of the Year. It's the first research-based EdTech management ecosystem called Learn Trials that helps with procurement, technology implementation, budget savings, and better outcomes. One thing that you might notice from this, but I definitely want to make sure I highlight, is that we have represented here no one from Silicon Valley. We have the Eastern Seaboard, we have the Midwest, we have CA, who, if you don't know, is based in New York. And then we also have Carl, who's come to us from North Carolina. So, with that, I want to go ahead and start with Ron. Ron, you guys invest in startup companies all the time. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, how you choose them, and if you could talk particularly about the rise of the rest. I think people would really love to hear about the rise of the rest bus tour. It's fascinating.
Thanks, Linda. As Linda mentioned, I'm general counsel at Revolution. We're a venture capital firm here in town with about $2 billion under management. We've invested in about 100 companies around the country. Probably 60 of them are app-based companies, and 34 cities, exactly 0 of them are in Silicon Valley. And I want to start by saying nothing bad about Silicon Valley. It is the hub of American innovation. It is a great national asset. It creates jobs and growth and innovation. And so, what I'm about to say is not bad on Silicon Valley. We need Silicon Valley as a country. It's a very important force in our economy. But what we believe in Revolution is what Linda mentioned, is the so-called rise of the rest. What we're seeing in our country is tremendous growth of innovation, entrepreneurship, and opportunity in the rest of the country. As that CBS piece mentioned, 75% of venture capital now goes only to 3 states, and really only to 3 municipalities: the Silicon Valley area, Boston, and New York. The other 47 states and thousands of cities split the other 25%. And we're part of a movement to try to change that, to try to make sure there's more economic opportunity, more growth, more venture capital in the rest of the country. We do that by investing in companies at all stages of development, from very, very early startups to more advanced companies. But we also have a program, Linda mentioned, called Rise of the Rest, where we load up a bus with a bunch of investors and interested technologists, and we get on the road and we spend a week on the road going to various cities, seeing what's there, finding companies to invest in, holding pitch competitions in all these cities, and ultimately picking some to invest in. And that's what's really grown our portfolio. What we found is that there are great entrepreneurs in every city. We're invested in small towns in North Carolina, in South Carolina, in Georgia, in just virtually every state in the country. And I think what's also interesting is that probably more than half of our founders are either women or people of color. There are great opportunities for non-traditional people to participate in this part of the economy, outside of Silicon Valley in particularly, and people who build great teams in their hometowns and people they know, and create great things to grow and invest in. Last thing I want to say is I think it's interesting to have this conversation, particularly here in Washington, D.C., for 3 reasons. First of all, as Michael mentioned, the federal government itself is a font of capital and contracting to create apps and to create jobs, and we should never lose sight of that. Secondly, public policy really matters for this. And that public policy around education, STEM education, talent and immigration, ability of people to connect to the internet, and how we make the internet widely available, broadband policy, things like that. All of these things are key things that are spurring this growth of innovation outside of Silicon Valley. And those policies are very, very important. And lastly, it is worth remembering that the very first public company, internet-based public company, is right here, 7 miles off the road at AOL in Northern Virginia. And it's a reminder that the next great wave of innovation and growth won't necessarily come from Silicon Valley. It can come from any place in the country if we have the right policies and the capital is out there to really help them. So,
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate that.
Can I ask one question? Did your bus have a logo on it?
It did have a logo on it.
What logo say?
It just says Revolution, big circle R, that's our logo. So we have a Rise of the Rest sign, the whole thing. So
That's great.
it's a very nice looking bus.
We say it's like a traveling roadshow Shark Tank.
It's something like a little bit like that.
Okay. Great. Terry, I want to go to you next. Thank you for being with us all the way from Chicago and flying in this morning. So tell us a little bit about how the Chicago app scene and incubator and accelerator scene differs from what we see in Silicon Valley, and what are your big takeaways and what you're seeing and what you're fostering there in Chicago?
Thanks. So my business is a venture development firm for startups, and over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been doing that now for over a decade. We've had 350 companies that we've helped launch, about $400 million worth of capital that's been directed through those companies. But over the last couple of years, what we've really been focused our attention on is the intersection between the startup economy and really the industry-leading corporate companies that are out there seeking to innovate, seeking to change, seeking to survive. One of the facts that drove us to this was that over 700 of the Fortune 1000 that was on the list 10 years ago, over 735 of them aren't on the list today. It's the most unprecedented churn of large companies that we've seen as an economy ever. There is massive disruption that's happening. And a lot of that disruption is coming from things like the app economy. But what I want to share with you today is really not so much about what the app economy is today, what we think of it is when we're all staring at our phones, or the apps that you've heard mentioned here today, whether it's Uber or Facebook or WhatsApp or any of the others. I want to talk to you about what's next. So one of the things that we learned in incubating and mentoring startups for so long is that entrepreneurs solve the problems that they see. That's one of the reasons, frankly, why Silicon Valley produces a lot of dating apps because they got a lot of single young men. It's one of the reasons why we see apps to hail cabs, because a lot of the people traditionally that have been building apps and building software live in urban cores where getting access to a quick ride makes a lot of sense. It's why you're more likely to see apps that check how busy a bar is or get your beer delivered to your dorm room if you're hanging out on a campus. But what we've begun to recognize is that the real opportunity for the app economy is really at that enterprise level. It's how the utility workers of the future go about doing their job in far more optimized ways. Over the last year, we've spent in our company a lot of time with the airline industries, thinking about not just how the flight attendants can use their apps, but how the airplane can talk to ground control automatically and use apps to do that. We spent a great deal of time in public safety working with first responders, thinking about what firemen and police officers can take into the field that make their jobs better, help them keep us safer and keep themselves safer. I mean, all these non-traditional ways. So it's really tempting for us to celebrate the apps that we know about. It's really tempting for us to sort of put them all into one box and think that that's the app economy. But I would challenge you to recognize the real value is really yet to be unlocked. The real value is thinking about the app economy as a harbinger for the Internet of Things economy. Right? It's one thing to talk about hundreds of millions of apps that are being used by people on mobile devices. It's another thing to be talking about hundreds of billions of apps that are integrated into everything that we see around us, apps that we interact with in seamless ways. That's what the mobile economy and the app economy is really ushering in, is that future. And we're happy to share more with you on that, but that's the kind of stuff that excites us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Terry. I appreciate that. Let's go next to Brendan. Brendan, CA Technologies is a long-standing, mature, large company that does a lot of B2B, business-to-business transactions. And I'd like you to explain to the audience here how a company like CA fits into the app economy.
Sure, happy to. So, CA is a Fortune 500 software company. We've been around 40 years. We make enterprise software that very large organizations consume to manage their own technology infrastructure. So we build software that helps people build and monitor and manage apps. And I think the reason, to key off something that Terry mentioned, the reason big companies are also exceedingly interested in apps is because apps are the new battleground for brand loyalty. In 5 or 10 years from now, your kids, my kids, are not going to know what a desktop browser is. They want to consume content via these devices. And the interesting thing is that apps present a really unique way for businesses to have very specific, dedicated interactions with their customers. So, the types of things that our customers care about as they're building applications are about meeting customers where they are and how they want to consume information. So we're seeing this in every industry. Our customers are the ones being disrupted and are the ones that are also looking to get ahead of that disruption. And what they are understanding is that the experience of an app has a lot more to do with brand loyalty today than their traditional advertising channels, their brick and mortar stores, because the experience that they can deliver to you on a phone is something that can literally kill or grow their business. We've done a lot of research on our own with our customer base, which comes from large financial institutions, massive retailers, airlines, auto manufacturers, and what we've been finding is that experience in driving customer interaction is the most efficient way that they can deepen their relationship with their customers. They want to make their interaction with their customer as frictionless as possible. And so a very real example of that is, we did some research with Harvard Business School a couple of years ago that found that, the rate of abandonment of apps is astronomically high after 3 seconds if it doesn't do what you think it's supposed to do. And it's not just that you'll stop using the app at that moment, but your impression of the quality or the reputation of that company is uniquely tied to your experience with the application. And so we found significant abandonment rates that mean that companies need to understand that the way that they're going to compete and communicate with you as consumers and with their enterprise consumers is via this platform. The other thing that we're finding certainly is that, and this bears out in the research from Dr. Mandel, is, software jobs are the jobs that are critical for moving this application strategy forward. Our biggest customers in the world are financial institutions. We're based in New York, and as you saw from the study that Dr. Mandel released, New York is the second fastest growing place in the country for app economy jobs. One of the reasons is that most companies today are thinking a lot more like software companies than they are brick and mortar businesses. So Bank of America, for example, has more software engineers than Microsoft. And it's because software-driven engagement with those customers is the way they see most appropriately that they can grow their business, preserve it, and be competitive. So as we continue to talk about opportunities that exist in the public policy space, we have thoughts around that area as well, but I think, enterprises are investing significantly in apps because that's where their customer base is, and it's where their future is tied to. If they can't build compelling apps, they're not going to be successful.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brendan. We appreciate that. Carl, thank you for being with us from North Carolina. We appreciate it. I want you to tell us a little bit about the app that you've created. It sounds like you have two, actually. But talk to us a little bit about Learn. And talk to us about your experience also in going through a program designed and implemented by AT&T, one of the largest and most mature companies that we have here in the U.S. Because I think an interesting part of what we're talking about here is how this brings together startups and some of the largest companies on the planet that are based here in the U.S.
Sure, I'd love to. As you mentioned earlier, I was a teacher and administrator here and overseas, but Learn is my third education technology company. The reality of what Learn does is we are an enterprise solution platform to help schools and districts and educators figure out which technologies, which apps are best for their students. So everything, I'll build on what Mike and Ron and Terry and Brendan have all mentioned. In the education space, the reason we exist is there are 100,000 education apps right now in the iTunes store. Education apps, 100,000 of them. 85% of them are ranked more than 4 stars. Impossible to tell the difference, right? U.S. schools, K-12 schools, spend $8 billion a year, growing 20% a year, on software and services, not even counting the hardware and other tools. Universities spend another $6 billion, and our platform has been able to show many of our clients that 95% of their technology that they're paying for, they're underutilizing, right? The 3-second rule. You tried it, and if you've been a teacher, if you had the opportunity to stand in front of a class like this and tell everybody, go to this website and follow my instructions, and if it doesn't work, you're dead. You're not going to do it. So the reality is what we've done is about 18 months ago, we created a web-based platform called LearnTrials.com, which is a research-based platform that allows educators to share their experiences with any technologies and helps their institutions integrate other data, student achievement data, pricing information, usage data, to figure out very quickly where they can improve both outcomes for students and their budgets. So most of the time when I'm talking to folks like this about policy, it's around student data privacy, it's around budget savings for states and universities. As an example of what we do, the University of North Carolina system, 19 different campuses, just launched our platform across all campuses, so 20,000 faculty can share their experiences, and so those vendors can shorten their procurement cycle by upwards of 75%. So we can get the best tools in front of students more quickly and save taxpayer dollars doing it. But we're a small company, right? We started 18 months ago. We've now got 12 employees. We've got over, I mentioned, 25,000 educators already trust our platform to help them do this work. And we made an affirmative decision to grow the company in Raleigh, North Carolina. We are surrounded by 3 R1 universities and over a dozen other post-secondary institutions. There's more talent than you can shake a stick at. We're actually training thousands of foreign-born folks. Maybe we'll talk about later the fact that we then push them out the door, given our current visa and other immigration policies. We have the opportunity to not just rent out couches or grab a car quickly, but the work that's going on with these apps are high impact. I want the apps on my airplane to work. It's a pretty important high power situation. I want my banking institution to be safe and secure. I want my 3 daughters' education to be the best it possibly can be. So this is a critical economy. And because of that, I think we also compete with good friends at AT&T and Red Hat and Citrix and CA. And frankly, we offer something different. You saw a couple of those things. We love our friends at AT&T, but many days they look at us longingly because we can get it done today. The process for getting, a work order at some of our large company friends can take months. So there are opportunities that we can compete with them in terms of quality of life and content and other things. But the reality is we compete for talent, and it's hard to get great, experienced talent, technical talent, the STEM careers that you need, especially outside of places like Silicon Valley, where speculative capital is more prudent, and the sort of natural community is not aligned with later stage folks taking the risks inherent in joining a startup. So tax incentives and waivers are hugely helpful when they're just starting to level the playing field. We were lucky in growing the company that we did work with Kaplan. We've done work with AT&T, which launched a program, has over $300 million being invested in education through Connect Ed, and a program called the AT&T Aspire Accelerator. To be clear, that $300 million wasn't coming to us. But we do get a chance to work with AT&T closely, and they've been hugely, it's been a great symbiotic relationship, I think. Our ability to innovate, our ability to bring a different view into what's going on in broadband into education has been helpful for them. But for us, you've heard about dozens of apps already today. I mentioned there are over 4,000 education technology tools in our library, and we compete with them just to get the word out. So when large companies recognize that there are great skill sets and intellectual property that can be valuable to the world, the distribution opportunities, the reasons we work together is because this is an ecosystem. And it takes large companies, small companies that at times can be more agile, and it takes policymakers who are willing and able to set up an environment that allows innovation to flourish, not just in Silicon Valley, but in every community around the state, because we're creating all of the net new jobs in America from small businesses. So there's a combination of things that have been valuable for us, both from the large company side, from the policy side, but most of our time is focused on education. That's just one small microcosm of this broader app economy that has huge impacts on where the world's going.
Thank you, Carl. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Dr. Mandel, let's go back to you for just a second. When you did this study, what were the biggest surprises for you? And then also, as you look out the next 4 to 5 years, where do you see this headed? Do you think it will level off? Do you think it will continue to grow? What do you think it will look like in a few years?
So that's 2 questions, and really it breaks into more questions. What was the biggest surprise? The biggest surprise had to be the fact that the growth had continued, not just in the first few years after the introduction of the smartphone, but through 2016 at this incredibly rapid pace. The second surprise was how it was spreading around the country. One thing that PPI does, we focus on innovation and growth at the national level and the global level, but also at the local level. And we were utterly fascinated to see how, and this has been mentioned before, how the tech-related and app-related growth has spread to places that we would not have necessarily expected. And it's terrific that we have a representative of Chicago on the panel, because Chicago is one of the places that really jumped out at us, at where last time I had looked and done a state level and local level study, it really hadn't been on the map at that point, and now it is. And so that was a big surprise as well. And it was terrific to have the Internet of Things mentioned. All right, we're in a world at this point where we've digitized about the 20% of the economy that are digital industries. So the point, this is going to be actually a study that we're going to have coming out very soon. I do a deep dive on this. 20% of the industries that are digital have digital outputs like financial services and entertainment and so forth. The amount of digitization in the 80% of the economy that's physical industries, really much, much smaller. And that's where all the growth is going to be. And it's not necessarily going to be in Silicon Valley. It's going to be in the places in the country that have manufacturing, that have other industries. And we're going to have this enormous creation of apps around the Internet of Things. So I have, one of the things that I have on my phone is a app that's connected to a webcam that's in my house. Now, I recently, when the latest blizzard came, it happened that I was out of town, and I knew I was going to be out of town. So what I did was I pointed the app outside the window. So I was in a nice warm place, and I could watch the snow pile up outside and see just how long it took the DC government to plow our street. I could also ask some of our neighbors to, which they did very nicely, to shovel the walk in the front. So this is just a small piece of the Internet of Things, what you can do with apps. So there's no reason to believe that we have topped out yet in terms of app-related growth. There is no signs of it in the data. And this is really pretty astonishing. If you'd asked me this 2 years ago, I would have predicted, like most technologies, that the growth rate would have slowed, but it hasn't yet.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ron, I want to go to you next. When you think about where to go for the Rise of the West bus tour, the places that you choose, can you describe a little bit about what you look for in terms of the cities that you go to, the kinds of companies that you're drawn to that you want to invest in, and how they grow jobs? That's a lot to cover. But we have staffers here from all over the country, and we have some that probably have really wonderful educational institutions there locally and some that don't. But what do you do when you choose what to invest in?
Well, first of all, it always helps if there's a great university and education community producing well-educated people. That really is a big harbinger of innovation and growth. Places where there are great incubators and supportive communities for startups. But also part of it is what both Dr. Mandel and Terry alluded to. As the economy moves into an Internet of Things economy, or an Internet of Everything economy, you're also looking for where there are really important local companies and really important sectors that haven't really been disrupted yet, right? Because that's where the next wave of this is going to come. It's not going to be in Silicon Valley. If you want to disrupt food production in America, you're probably going to go to St. Louis where Monsanto is. If you want to disrupt certain kinds of other industries, you're going to go where the heart of those industries are, and those are scattered around the country. And I think we're looking at a thing where maybe 10 years from now, the phrase Internet of Things or Internet of Everything is going to seem as silly as me telling you that clock back there is electricity enabled. Electricity is just part of our life. We're talking about electricity enabled devices anymore. And that's what's happening with the Internet. But it is moving into these more physical worlds. And that's also, by the way, when we public policy a lot more important. Facebook or Google mess up the way they store your pictures or you find your data. We do have public policy fights about that, don't get me wrong, obviously we do. But when we're starting to disrupt the way food comes to your table, the way your health care is managed, the way driverless vehicles are driving around the interstates, that's going to engage the public policy process in a much more compelling, much more important way. So the last thing we look for is we're looking for, as we go to these cities, local leaders, political leaders, public officials in both political parties who are interested in being part of that conversation, interested in thinking about what the right public policies are for their communities, their cities, their states, to help really support innovation, to strike the right balance between regulation and innovation, and help make some of these industries that in the past really haven't been disrupted, be digitized and show the impact that the internet and the app economy can have on changing how these basic things we've lived with for centuries are going to be delivered to us and manufactured and sold to us in a radically different way in the next couple of years.
Thank you, Sheila. Terry, let's go to you. I'd like to hear, the entrepreneurs that you work with every single day, when they vent about their frustrations that they're facing and helping them grow, what do you usually hear in terms of what their biggest concerns or frustrations are?
Well, that gets to the public policy priorities, right? I think we're pretty good at recognizing the technology community in a monolithic way, but we're not very good at all at understanding what drives the economy of startups, or even what types of startups are the most favorable from an economic development perspective. So everyone knows WhatsApp. Remember the application WhatsApp? And of course, it got massive headlines because it was sort of the darling of an example of the app economy, right? It was 55 employees and something like under 18 months from start to acquisition. And what was the acquisition price? I remember it was like $19 billion, right? And everybody said, wow, I too can go build an application and I can make $19 billion with only 55 employees in 18 months. And that was sort of a picturesque view of the app economy. For a guy like Ron or maybe me who makes investments, that sounds pretty good. But from an economic development perspective, that's not very good. Right? I mean, the truth is that a company like WhatsApp, who only created 55 jobs before it exited for a massive amount of money, made a few people a whole lot of money, but it didn't really create a whole lot of jobs. It really didn't have a huge lasting impact on the economy. We're going to see entirely new concepts for impact in the economy as this app economy moves into enterprises. As Ron has said, it's not people that drive dump trucks and bulldozers. It's software that drives dump trucks and bulldozers, and increasingly, more and more, it's applications that can be built. So I think that's one aspect of public policy that I think we have to recognize, is that we've just begun. I would say I'm not surprised at all to what Mike said, that it's still growing. I think we're just starting, which is really the main point of that. I think the other aspect of public policy that entrepreneurs deal with on a regular basis is this app economy thing is really about equity. It's really about opening up to anyone, anywhere, to build something cheaper, faster, and easier than they ever could before. So you've heard a lot of us talk today about Raleigh, Chicago, Florida, and other places where you can build an application in a broom closet almost. But that's also true and has a massive impact, a corollary to our immigration policy. Because if you can build an application in a broom closet in Florida, you can also build that application and go back to India or China or wherever you came from. So we are competing on an entirely new global scale against a diversified set of competitors like we've never seen before. The other aspect of equity, though, is in what we've been doing with STEM education and the outreach. We were lucky enough to be a part of starting a charter school in Chicago 5-6 years ago. Inner city schools, 60% of them are female, 95% of them are folks of color coming from communities and homes where they probably didn't even have computers, if you can believe that today. And yet those kids are now taking 2 hours a day, every day, of application development classes and software classes and project-based learning classes, and they're building applications. I mean, I've taken supporters and donors into this school and seen kids sitting up off in the corner playing games, and you walk over to the computer and you're like, oh my God, you know, I'm trying to show this donor of the school, I'm trying to brag about the cool things, and here's this kid over here playing a game, and I can't even get him to turn around and pay attention to what's going on. And then you start probing and asking questions, you realize that, well, he kind of created that game. And he's like 16 years old, and the donor said to him, well, that's cool. I mean, how many people are playing that game? And he said, well, I think it's just over 300,000 now. Right? He's like a 16-year-old kid who didn't even have a computer at home, and he created a game that people are playing through their phones and through web browsers that hundreds of thousands of people are playing on now. So that equity argument that the app economy introduces, I think, is another major aspect of this, the ability to bring more people into the economy, as long as we steer it correctly, move it in the right direction.
Yeah, another thing to add to that, which we haven't touched too much on until this point, is the importance of infrastructure. We talked a little bit about broadband, and it's easy for us to talk and think about that because we live in a metropolitan area, obviously, where broadband connectivity is ubiquitous. But reinforcing some of the things that both Ron and Terry mentioned, we did some work recently in the Kansas City area, and that's part of the Silicon Prairie, but Kansas City is the first place that's getting Google Fiber in the country, and I'm not sure how much you all know about this, but this is Google's plan to bring, gigabit internet access ubiquitous, and there were 1,200 cities in the country that were competing to be the first place that Google would roll this out. Kansas City won, partly because of their commitment to investing in building the infrastructure, but also because of their ease of doing business with, right? And I think that regulatory environment, the interest in innovation and opening up new opportunities in local communities is critical. And what they found, certainly since they have begun this process of opening up Google Fiber in Kansas City, has been that it has become immensely attractive to investors and entrepreneurs who, just because of the backbone of that ubiquitously fast internet access as a development platform, in and of itself is driving people into Kansas City. Also, because the city has gone all in opening up other investments and tax credits and access to capital in those markets that's made it a really attractive investment. And so the underlying technology infrastructure is also fundamentally important to make sure that a kid in Indiana or someone in south side of Chicago who wants to build a new application has access to the basic building blocks of digital infrastructure to be able to take their idea, capitalize it, develop it, and operate it in the open market.
And Linda, we'll be back here in late April, and part of that agenda for TechNet is introducing something we've been working on called the Startup Agenda. So to your point, access to capital in new ways for early stage companies, access to talent in better ways for early stage companies, access to markets, and Ron mentioned earlier the opportunities just within the federal government, the ability for small companies to be able to access and the procurement process with big companies, with government, with others. That's a major emphasis that we're working on right now. We're looking forward to bringing that back in April.
I think you can't see the equity issue more starkly than in education is a great example. We see it consistently as part of the motivation, and our mission too is to ensure that when you have that infrastructure, as we invest in this area, we have to make sure that we're not expanding the digital divide, but we're using it to bring that closer together. And I'd like to build on the access to capital and this question around policy, because so in preparation, I asked and spoke to about 200 founders around North Carolina to say, what are you looking for? What impacts you as you're growing these companies? It's an area that's garnered about $1.2 billion in investment last year. And there were three things. We've hit on immigration and visa reform already. The reality is as you mentioned, Terry, we've got a lot of talent that we are pushing towards countries that we are now competing with in the global economy, which is counterproductive. I think the second thing is really on incentivizing, experienced STEM, tech talented, trained folks to come into early stage companies, either through tax incentives or waivers, to help them make it a viable step, even when you're not eating macaroni and working for beer money. Because there's a time in life, some of us are lucky enough to get to, where there's a lot more mouths to feed. And so the reality of making that plunge into the startup scene is very difficult for those senior talent. And finally, we have to increase access to capital. And there are specific steps in terms of R&D tax credits, in terms of shortening the founder capital gains waivers, which are antiquated in their time periods, that we can take here that could have huge impact in every community around the state. I'm sure TechNet can share. We actually posted, the founders in North Carolina posted a Medium on our Medium account to use the apps that you can get on Twitter today to see more details about those specific policies that could be impactful, but it helps small businesses regardless of politics, regardless of geography.
Carl, I had a question for you too. TechNet operates at the state level too, and at the 50 state level, we do that hard, arduous work of state by state by state, going and trying to change state law so that computer science classes count towards a degree. And it's a really tough task for us to really get that put in place and get the funding to train the teachers who can teach the STEM classes, all of that. So can you address some of that or give us some advice on that, help us with that?
Sure. I mean, I will tell you that I think congratulations, Florida was the first state, I think, to acknowledge computer science, and it was as a language, basically. How many of you were required to take a language either in high school or college? How many of you can still speak it? Great. I will test you after. But if you, I should ask how many of you still have on your resume. But computer science is probably, some of these languages are probably going to be more valuable than Latin, which is what I took in high school, which was hugely useful in the SAT, but not very valuable in the work that I currently do. So investing in computer science as a language, acknowledging these credits. The reality is we are moving towards a personalized learning world. Our policies, our practices, our instruction is struggling to make that leap. At Learn, we believe that efficacy should matter. If it helps kids learn, that's what should matter. Not just marketing or how many stars you've got on the iTunes store. And to do that, if it did matter, policies would be different. And that's up to you. We can make that happen. And at state levels, it's a matter of education and celebrating what's working. Celebrating the student in Chicago who's got 300,000 downloads and is entertaining people. That's an important celebration that he could not have done, or she could not have done, without a computer at home. Or without, if they were focused on studying how to bubble in a test page.
Thank you, Carl. I have a few more questions for panelists, but I'd love to engage the audience. Do any of you have questions for the panelists in terms of what they do, what their experience and perspective is, advice for you as you do your job?
One thing I'm curious about, something that you all talked about, is how when these apps start, they're so maneuverable and they can take advantage of being small and kind of finding a space in the economy to disrupt or fit into. But as they start to grow and scale up, become bigger and bigger and bigger and less maneuverable, and they kind of start to get, I guess, entrenched maybe in their models of business. So what's the balance there, and how do they avoid some of the pitfalls you've identified already, like taking months to get a work order through, if the ultimate goal is to scale up and provide a nationwide service?
So there's a difference between B2C, business to consumer solutions, and B2B, business to business. And the B2C stuff is a lot of what we think of when we hear apps, right? It's the things we've all downloaded on our phones. It's the things that are available through the iTunes store that we put there. Those are relatively easy to launch, and if you catch lightning in a bottle, go viral, and even, as I said earlier in the WhatsApp example, maintain hundreds of thousands or millions and millions of users with relatively small resources and relatively small staff. The B2B side of things, this disruption in education, this disruption in manufacturing and real estate and financial services and healthcare and all those other issues, that's much, much more difficult for a small company, a startup, to be able to get there. So when we talk about the startup agenda, a big part of that is access to markets and even incentives that include what brings big companies to market as channels for these small companies, what facilitates or encourages partnerships between these big companies and the smaller companies to be able to get them to scale faster or get them access to certain markets easier. So I think in that side of the equation, it's going to be a lot more difficult and it's going to grow a lot more slowly, but it's a lot more valuable in the end.
It's never been easier to start a software-powered business, but it's not the same to grow. And I think we're a great example of partnering with AT&T and Kaplan and others who have access and to support that distribution. The reality is, in the education space, like many companies, 2/3 of our sales cycle is after yes. It's procurement and legal and contracting and getting through the process. The irony of our work is that what we do is make that significantly shorter, but we have to sell into the broken system before we can fix it. So that's where I think you're going to see a lot of disruption on the enterprise space is addressing some of these regulatory challenges.
There's two messages that are coming out of this panel. I can understand why you hear both of them. One is there's a lot of small apps that are created by small businesses. Then there's a lot of apps that are being created by large businesses, okay, or by large businesses that are contracting small businesses, or by small businesses that have grown into large businesses. So what happens in the app economy, and when we do reports, we sort of look at all of these, is that you have every possible combination of small, big, large, tiny, enormous, and some of them are great job creators coming out of big businesses, and some of them are the small businesses. So the thing is, when we use the term ecosystem, it's about both the small and the large companies in this case.
The only thing I'd add to that is, I thought Michael's thing was excellent, and then there are companies we don't think of as tech companies at all for which the app factor is increasingly important. For example, we're the largest investors in Sweetgreen, the salad chain, right? They've grown like wildfire, they're very successful. Part of that is excellent lettuce, part of that is like great recipes, so on and so forth. But part of that is they have the best online ordering app, which enables them to get people through that store at lunchtime a little bit faster, makes for a better consumer experience, allows them to get more salads out the door, allows them therefore to grow faster, open more stores, create more units, create more employment, so on and so forth. And so you might think about Sweetgreen as a technology company or even an app-based company, but that app is a big part of their success. And we're seeing that in more and more businesses that you don't think of as part of this space, but for which this is a critical part of their business model.
Yeah, that's one of the things that was, that's similar to what I was mentioning before. Most of the companies that are our customers globally, think of themselves as a digital business, whether they are or they aren't. And so their app strategy is fundamentally important to them, being able to meet their customers where they are. If you think about a company like Nike, for example, they're not a shoe company anymore. They're much more a health data analytics company. And so the apps that they're building to integrate with your smartphone, to connect to the sensor in your sneakers, that can give you better data about your running or your cycling or whatever, that's the monetization opportunity for them to expand their business. And we're seeing that across the board. There's a great company we work with in the UK called Tesco, which is a grocery chain, a retail organization. And they've been immensely successful in other markets because of their app strategy, principally. So they have an amazing application that they've debuted in the Tokyo subway. So, for example, so if you're sitting there on the platform, you're riding the subway, they have a virtual hologram of a grocery store shelf. And you can use your phone to scan the barcode of items on that shelf, and when you get home, your groceries are there. They're not looking at their brick and mortar retail stores as the mechanism for them to engage with their consumers. And so the apps that they're building to enable you, wherever you are, to take advantage of the services that they have to offer, whether it's a grocery store, whether it's buying sneakers or measuring your output from exercise, it's completely changing the way everybody wants to interact. And I think it's not just, the online businesses that you're thinking about today. I spend a lot more time on, my financial banking apps. I haven't been into a bank in probably 10 years. I really don't want to. And that is the reason that the banks and financial institutions are making it a hell of a lot easier for me to take a picture of my check and deposit it, so I don't have to go in and wait in line and deal with a branch. That lowers their costs and enables them to develop new services that engage me in different ways than they've ever really thought about before.
Thank you. Question? Mm-hmm.
There's an author named Alec Ross who wrote a book, or has written a book called Industries of the Future. It's on the New York Times bestseller list. He used to work at the State Department as a senior advisor for innovation, and he focuses on robotics, healthcare, specifically cancer, and analytics, as Mr. Peter explained. And I was just kind of curious, this question is more or less addressed to Mr. Mandel and Mr. Klein. With respect to robotics and with respect to healthcare, cancer, and analytics, what do you see with respect to innovation in apps, as well as with the rise of the web?
Look, if you look at it, if you think about any of these fields, the interface is going to be through a mobile device, whether it's an iPad or a smartphone or an Android, and if it is, it's going to be apps. And if it's going to be apps, it's going to create jobs. So if I think about part of what happens when I think about robotics, and this is often not realized, is that you have innovation. It looks like it's destroying jobs over here, but it's creating jobs over there. And when we talk about the history of innovation is a job creator in the areas where you have the innovation. And in this case, the app jobs are part of the jobs being created by the disruption. But because of the way that the government collects data, you don't see it that way. So we actually had to use new techniques that were developed specially for this to sort of pick up these jobs. So if I went and looked for the app-related jobs connected to robotics, there is no robotics industry in the BLS figures. There are no robotics specialists. There are no app developers. Probably 10 years from now there will be, but that's the rate, that's the lag. And so the problem is, to the degree to which policy responds is based on government statistics, you end up sort of seeing a faulty picture. So in this case, if I was going to look at the job creation connected to robotics, I would not only look at the people who build robots, I would look at the people who develop the software by which people interact with those robots, the same thing for healthcare, and so forth and so on. And so we know at this point that there's been a tremendous amount of healthcare apps that have been created. And I just need to say one thing about regulation at this point. The FDA has had a love-hate relationship with healthcare apps in terms of whether they actually want to exercise their right of approval over them and force them into the same sort of long approval process that a pharmaceutical or piece of medical equipment has. This is an amazing issue for regulation and growth, to the degree to which the government regulators make new apps jump large hurdles. We slow down the rate of innovation and slow down the rate of job growth. So I'm going to write down and go take a look at this. Take a look at this book. I'm very interested to see what he says about where the job creation comes from.
I agree with all that. And the only thing I'd add, one other sector I think that's interesting to me is transportation. So we were early investors in Zipcar, car sharing service. And if you think about it, basically the way people had gotten around hadn't really changed for 50 years. It's kind of shocking. You flew on a plane, or you took a train, or you drove your own car, or you got in a taxi, or both. That was it. That was kind of the way you got around in like 1945, and kind of the way you got around in like 1995. And so, the rise of car sharing with Zipcar, you then had all of a sudden now Car2Go, which is kind of more like an hour-ized car sharing thing, and then Uber and Lyft, and who knows what comes next. But the way in which people get around from place to place to place is very different today than it was even just 5 or 6 years ago. And that's created
9.5 square miles of the city of Chicago are occupied as car storage. And if the effects of a mobile app like Uber are to reduce cars on the road, you're going to have a tremendous impact across other parts of the economy that you haven't even thought about. There's new places to develop, new places to build. So there's all sorts of interconnectedness between these apps.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Go ahead.
Okay. This might be a little off topic, so sorry if it is, but I was wondering, how does this development of software and apps play into the sharing economy? Do you have any idea if this the sharing economy will be the majority of what these apps will be playing into, or is there another sort of sector or anything like that?
I think that you can't have the sharing economy without the apps, but the apps go way, way, way beyond that. So, if I just look at the count on my screen, I've got an Uber app. That's one of the 25 apps, but only one of them. So I think if you think about the sharing economy as part of this, whether it's car sharing or whether or not it's Airbnb or any one of a number of different types of sharing that we may be having come up, that it's important, but it's actually not kind of the only or even maybe the key factor. That the message that is coming out here from the panel is that apps can be found in any industry and are increasingly found in places where you don't expect them, and increasingly generate jobs in places where you don't expect them. And we could go on and on in terms of app jobs being created in manufacturing firms, app jobs created in transportation and utilities. In healthcare is going to be an incredibly fertile source of app jobs. And we have to remember when we're sort of talking about policy here and policy related to the tech industry, that a lot of these jobs are being created in ways that don't show up in the conventional tech industry and are extremely important.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the panel really quickly. So you get to see companies and apps before we do. If you think about trends or even specific really cool companies that you know about, does anyone want to share something that you're aware of right now that folks might not know about that's coming?
Anything you want to pitch?
Well, yeah, I'll be honest, obviously it's a company we invest in, but we just invested in a company called Policy Genius, which is a new way to buy life insurance, pet insurance, renter's insurance online, kind of an effort to take something that's very complicated, give people some financial literacy around that, and take these complicated products, make them simple to understand, easy to buy, in a competitive, open, transparent marketplace. I just think you're going to see a lot of fintech's been mentioned, education certainly been mentioned, and hopefully we'll see more of this demystification of complicated things, with more transparency and openness and easier ability for consumers to make better choices.
When you said Policy Genius, I thought we were going to sort of, do policy, public policy easier and faster than we could before. Nope. And disrupt the jobs of the people sitting in the audience.
Nope, not that.
I don't think I can give you a specific one, but I'll go back to what I was saying earlier. This whole idea that all of the biggest companies in the world are churning and being replaced at a breakneck speed. And they're being replaced by agile, easier, cheaper, faster to develop startups and software that's coming from all sorts of different sources. So I'm talking right now into a Shure microphone. Shure actually is a partner of ours. We have a joint venture that we work with them on, and it's in reinventing the future. This is a 91-year-old company who's been making this microphone and technology around this microphone for 91 years. But we're now collaborating to go out and figure out what the startup economy, what the venture ecosystem can deliver to them in terms of helping them drive innovation into the future. You know, one of the things that caused them to look at that was they saw a guy stand up in the middle of a huge auditorium, and instead of someone tossing the Shure microphone to him or walking up to a microphone and saying, "My name is Ron, I'm with Revolution, and this is the thing that my question that I have for you," this person just talked into his mobile phone, an app that was on the mobile phone, which on the back end was integrated with the sound system, and the person's face popped up on the screen, and it was Ron's face. It wasn't actually Ron's face, and what he does, and all that was just done. And if you're somebody who's been making this microphone for 91 years, that kind of rocks you a little bit. That makes you think, wow, I probably need to figure out new ways of innovation. So those are the cool things to me. Those types of projects that, traditional main old line industries where people have been doing something a certain way forever and ever, and the what's next that's going to come as a result of that.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Any other comments from the other panelists?
I'll just add that I think you're going to see a lot of education moving, and I think that more broadly, I think the user experience, whether it's with larger companies, smaller companies, innovation, is just going to move quicker and quicker. Our ability to learn, the amount of data that is being created through this economy is massive. So I think keeping an eye out on analytics and being able to digest that data quickly enough to do something with it is going to be a critical area to move forward to.
Thank you. Well, I want to get you guys out on time. I just want to thank all of you for being here. I know you have really busy jobs, stressful jobs, so the fact that you decided to spend your morning with us means a lot. I'll leave you with just a couple of things. I've told you a little bit about what TechNet's about. A couple of things coming up that I want to make you aware of is TechNet will be at South by Southwest Interactive in Austin. So if you're going to be in Austin, please let us know. We'd love to see you while we're there. So just let Scott, who's in the back of the room, or Connor back there, or Sue, know that you're going to be there. Give them your card because we'd love to see you there. As Terry mentioned, April 27th is when we will have our big CEO and senior executive fly-in. So we will have 30 to 35 of the top CEOs and senior executives of technology from across the country here storming the Capitol. We will be meeting with officials at the White House and all across the Capitol, so we hope to run into you on April 27th. And stay tuned also for the Startup Agenda unveiling, which will happen on April 27th. Please access our website, technet.org. We make sure to keep you updated on our activities and also our point of view on policies. And finally, I just want to make sure you understand, and I think this point has been driven home today, technology is not a place you visit. We have a lot of elected officials, probably some of your bosses, who come out to Silicon Valley, and we host over 100 officials from the administration and among the Senate and House members every year, and we're very proud of that, and we will continue to do that. But you need to also know that we have offices in Austin, Boston, and Seattle, and we also facilitate visits to our member companies scattered all across the U.S. So please take advantage of what we offer at TechNet. If you or your bosses would like to visit one of our member companies in Silicon Valley, sure, we definitely can help you with that. But also our member companies all across, exactly, come to New York. All across the country, come to us. That's what we're here to help you do. We want to help your elected officials meet with the CEOs, the engineers, the CTOs, all the people who really drive job growth in this country and help them understand the business models and also the hurdles that we face at the federal level so that you can help us deal with that. Okay, with that, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.